Matt, and I will be talking with Herman Man about leading cross-functional teams and adapting frameworks to fit organizational goals while addressing global team dynamics. Herman, the first question I wanted to ask you is about the CTPO CPO concept, because I'm seeing it like a lot that we are going into this like CTPO, even CPTO. So like kind of like difficult to pronounce there for me, but I mean, like, do you think like this trend makes sense to connect the technical role and the product role, or maybe it depends on the organization? Like, what is your experience here?
Yeah, I think it really depends a lot on the organization. And I don't think the trend will necessarily pull in one way or another. I think it really depends on who the founder is and what their strength is in. I think most founders have a product or an engineering bent in Silicon Valley. And so, therefore, many of the founders will want to control one discipline or another. And so, having that be aggregated through one central person, I don't think is likely. On the other hand, when you have a founder that is more sales and marketing driven and doesn't have expertise in that area, having someone to make that decision earlier instead of relying on the CEO is really attractive. And even though my title here at Bluevine is CPO, I do find myself wearing many hats, almost like a CPTO at times. However, I've taken on that role more so at previous companies like Xero, where I ran product and engineering together. And again, the advantage there was that I didn't need to go escalate any of those decisions that needed to be made between engineering and product. I could make it much more local and quickly and streamlined through myself with a lot of the decisions that needed to get made. So it really depends on the organization and the expertise of where the founder or CEO is.
Um, and you mentioned the previous organization like Xerox, because you have really interesting background. Before the Bluevine, you worked for the Xerox, you worked for the Microsoft. Uh, so you have various experiences on the product side and leadership side. So I'm always like trying to figure it out. What are the best things that you brought from one of those, like from Xerox? What are the best things that you brought from Microsoft? You learned them there and you applied on Bluevine, for instance.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, one of the great things for working for different companies is you see a different way of solving problems and you understand the culture by which the process was formed because of the people, the product, as well as just the culture in general. And so for me, a lot of it has been making sure that we get the efficiencies and the benefits of process and of people in larger companies like Microsoft while removing the things that aren't actually necessary. And so a practical example for me is Scrum or the RICE framework for prioritization. I believe in having a process that is well documented so people understand and you can go scale the organization and be more efficient. But at the same time, I'm not religious on the process itself. I don't care in a ceremony for Scrum whether or not it's one, two, or three questions or the questions rotate. It needs to work for the organization. Process for me is a means to the end and not the end. And what I've seen over my career is a lot of people let the process be the end goal, and it's not. You just got to remember exactly what you're doing. And so for me, it's that perspective of taking the best out of everything and applying it to the situation. And for Bluevine, that really means looking at Scrum, looking at RICE slightly differently, but applying the benefits of the outputs to make sure that it works for our company.
Good that you mentioned the processes, because this is one thing that we discussed recently during our quick talk. And it got my attention, like, the philosophy and an approach to building the processes and like methodologies that you mentioned, the Scrum, right? That you have doesn't have to be exact, like in a book, right? And like influences of leaders like Elon Musk, they have the influence on how do you like evolve as a leader. And I'm just wondering, have you got like this, this road when you saw, for instance, the Elon Musk, like how he's making the stuff at the Twitter, right? And maybe this, like this or other example help you to hold.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think Elon Musk is obviously a really smart, talented individual and runs multiple different companies. I think for me, what I admire the most in terms of how he approaches a problem is really from first principles. And I think it's really important that you question the status quo. So what he does well is really looking at a set of processes or a set of products and questions, do we actually need this? And the the default answer should be we don't need it, and there should be some pain in actually explaining why you need it. And it really gets back down to first principles. And for me, it's very much the same way, whether or not it's the process that we're running or whether or not it's the product that we're building. Some people call it MVP, and you look at it and you're like, that's not an MVP. That's way too that's not even viable, right? And so I think the key thing to go do is really cut it down, but then also have hard questions and argue it out in terms of, what are the features that we actually need to go roll out to make this a very viable product. And so for me, it's always that getting back down to first principles and then layering back up.
Um, and regarding the your industry, right? Because with the Bluevine, you make pretty modern, let's say, stack. You can call it maybe fintech. We can call it like a fintech, right? Uh, and when I look at the US market, like there's plenty of modern startups, plenty of modern products. But still, when you go to the US, I'm European, right? I'm going to the US and I'm hearing the stories about the check and how hard it is to get the bank account and how hard it is to do the taxes. So I mean, there is so much need to rebuild the kind of software and the systems that are there locally. And I wanted to ask you like how do you rebuild those systems, or maybe where do you started with the Bluevine? What are the like real pain in the ass for the people that you are trying to solve or the company?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Matt. And I think, there's a lot to unpack there. I think first off, you are right. In the US, I think the banking infrastructure or the banking experience is pretty poor, and largely because the systems are very antiquated. So I think if you take a step back, you look at, well, how did that become what it is? Well, a lot of the major banks today, the major financial institutions have layers upon layers upon layers of infrastructure, all the way back from COBOL and Fortran on mainframes, right? And so when you have a core that's running that old and you're layering on top and a lot through acquisition, really the systems don't talk well together at all. And I can speak about that personally in my banking experience. So I bank with one of the largest uh, banks here in the US, and they constantly ask me whether or not I want a mortgage. I have a mortgage with them. And so it basically is an example where infrastructure just, they don't talk to the systems don't talk with one another. At Bluevine, we had an opportunity to do things differently and look at things differently. And it starts off with the customer experience. Yes, granted, Bluevine is a newer platform, and so therefore we get the benefits of building in the cloud from day one, as opposed to something on-prem or through a mainframe or whatnot. So we get that benefits. But knowing that benefit, how do we exploit and leverage that to actually move even faster? And so it gets back down into the philosophy and what we want. Our core thesis for what we build at Bluevine is everything needs to be connected as one. It needs to be one central platform. And so we started roughly about 10 years ago, focused on a credit problem. And what I mean by that is we actually started in invoice factoring, not small business banking. And Eyal, our founder and CEO, he had a vision that was you could leverage the internet and leverage machine learning to actually make invoice factoring quicker and lending quicker. And so we built around that, but we always built around the assumption that that would be a building block to the larger platform. And so that's what we've done. And so we were able to go launch a small business checking account, which again, our thesis is if you're going to have a relationship with a small business, you need to have a checking account because lending is very transactional. Checking and banking is where small businesses build a relationship with you and you earn their trust. And so we built a small business banking account, and we have that now. We have the ability for them to get credit, so they can get a line of credit. They can get a revolving credit card with us as well. And we've built an AP and accounts payable bill pay platform from the ground up as well that is fully integrated within Bluevine. We have other products that we're about to release later on this year and early next year. I can't talk about them yet, but it's basically our strategy where you kind of see it with a hub and spoke model where our hub is really the business checking account. And then you have all these different products that integrate very well within them. And really the way that I think about it is it's almost like a financial OS, if you will.
It reminds me like kind of HubSpot, right? If you're using HubSpot, you have sales, marketing teams, you have customer support teams. So you have all the possible tools, like even the small one that helps you with the little things. So I kind of like see it as this.
Exactly.
And like and you mentioned one of the co-founders, and like when I checked the Bluevine, it's a company from Israel, right? This is where all that started. And I'm always interested in the cultural differences between like building the product or dealing with the team, managing the team, which is based in like a different time zone, or even like if within like a different culture, which is sometimes difficult, right? So and when you look at it, right, when you look at the big picture, you're a CPO, so you have different people. Like how like you approach the guys in US? How do you work? Do you have like your approach, or how you should approach the guys in Israel? How do you like? What are the cultural differences in working here?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's definitely there are cultural differences or time zone differences that you just need to manage through in terms of work week. For example, within Israel, there is the work week that starts from their Sunday through their Thursday, as opposed to Monday through Friday here in the US. And so when you add that all up, you end up losing more hours. I think culturally, Israel is really a really driven country, and talent is immense there. I think I saw some capital, or I saw some study where there was 1.7K citizens were startups, right? And so it's a startup nation, and they really hustle. I think that's what I found with Israel when working with them. They really do hustle. They're also very direct. And so the culture there is to really confront the situation as opposed to being really nice with your positioning and so forth, which in the US we're more likely on the latter side. And so to bring people along, it's a very different way of thinking. I think in Israel, it's more about just telling the people the why, but you can tell them and be very blunt with them. Where in the US, I think it's more convincing and bringing people along. And so there are cultural differences, but for me, really the most important thing as I'm building a team is to be able to set the norms and set the guidelines of the team. So what I don't want to do is tippy toe around different offices and different cultures. I want to be very explicit in terms of here's how I operate. And I will operate and be direct with my US team, but I'll always be respectful, and likewise with Israel. And just because I'm direct with people in Israel, it doesn't mean I'm disrespectful to them. And so there's a set of tenets that I operate by, and that's the only way that it'll work for me to be consistent, and it'll allow me to scale as well.
What is your team structure, and who is your partner in crime here?
Yeah, so the team structure here is I run product engineering, I run product and design, and Nir Klar, who's a co-founder, runs all of engineering, essentially R&D. And that is my partner in crime. So I work closely with Nir across our sprints, across our quarterly plans and so forth, and our yearly plans to deliver what we need to deliver.
And I'm always interested. I mean, like I have a few friends who work as CPOs, and when I got some conversation with one of them, I see there is like a strong push or strong emphasis on the business, right? Which should be obvious, but it's not so obvious in every company or every startup. And I'm just wondering, in your case, right? So you have the CTO, like the co-founder who taking the engineering part, you taking the CPO role. So do you work, for instance, with the business or the sales a lot? They are getting the client's feedback, and then you are like making the kind of bets on what kind of features do we need, ROI on it. Like how do you approach it? Maybe do you measure the potential ROI in the future of it, in the future?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think a really good question. I'll unpack it in two ways. I think one question was, how do we prioritize implicitly? I think what you're asking there. And then the other essentially is, who do I work with to get that information, really? And so maybe the best way to think about this is from a prioritization perspective. We do take multiple inputs from multiple stakeholders, and the stakeholders being sales, like you said, support being another. We talk to customers as well, so we do qualitative interviews with them. We get quant surveys as well. And of course, another stakeholder are the machines. They tell us specifically how users are using our product, and so how we can improve them. But it's really through the conversations of sales or through the conversations we've had with customers where we get insights into exactly what we think customers actually want, what their problems are, and we think how we can go solve it differently. The way that we actually approach problem solving in general is we have a thesis, which is a 5-year plan. And the question is at 5 years, what do we think Bluevine is? And what do we think Bluevine has really done and served for our customers? We then back that into a yearly plan, which starts at the calendar year. So our fiscal year and our calendar years align on January 1st. And so I'm in the process right now of planning for all of 2025. And the planning there really is more around, at the end of 2025, what do we think we're going to get done as it pertains to our 5-year plan? And then we have quarterly planning processes that help drive that execution of the plan. And of course, the plan changes over a year. And so the assumption that we've built over the year is one where we have a high conviction over it, but we're not dogmatic about it. And it's not that it'll never change. And so that's our approach. And in that process, we learn, right? And so through the quarterly planning cycle, we're having more conversations with customers. We've launched certain products. We're seeing the feedback and we have to iterate. We'll have assumptions where we're like, hey, we thought that after Q1, we would have been good here, wouldn't need to touch us, only to find that, you know what, we were totally off here and we might have to pivot. And so we'll do that through a quarterly planning process. But it starts with having a thesis and a target, if you will, over 5 years backed up into the next year so that we're in the details.
And speaking of 2025, because like you let's say you have the plan for 5 years, right? And the last 2 years, I mean, they are insane, right? So when I'm thinking about the planning, right, in the future, so the one thing, it's like the big techs, like the recession, like not really planned. And the second thing, it's the AI. So I assume like in your product, AI, and you are the product where you have a lot of data, could have a lot of impact. So I'm just wondering, how do you see the future? How do you see 2025, 2026? Did it affect your plans?
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, yes, absolutely. You know, we have a hypothesis on the next year, the next 2 years. Obviously, there's macro conditions like the economy. Today is election day, or the post-election day, and so there's there's implications to that we just don't know until the new term takes effect. And so there's only so much we can plan, but of course we make assumptions on that planning. Now you talk about AI, and AI is an interesting one. It's obviously, with Gen AI and with ChatGPT, it's really garnered so much interest. And the way I think about it is that there's AI used across a number of different scenarios, and there's three in my mind that pop into my head. The first is really around productivity, internal productivity. Can employees use it to be more productive? And the answer is yes, we're using it across product, across engineering, across HR, across marketing, across legal, using ChatGPT for research and for generation of content materials, right? Doesn't replace humans, but augments the efficiency and the scale. So that's scenario one, productivity. The second one really is around proven use cases, is what I'm saying. And so proven use cases for Bluevine, we use it specifically around underwriting, around machine learning, specifically around models, so that we can better underwrite our customers, whether it be on our lending product or on our checking product. And then there's also the proven use case of customer support, for example, where customers are used to talking to a chatbot to get an answer. And so that makes our customer support people more efficient. Where I think it's yet to be seen, at least in the fintech world, is other scenarios, right? Can you use it for forecasting? I think you can, but are you worried about hallucinations? Yes, you are, right? So you want to be a little more thoughtful there. I think the key thing, again, though, is when we look at AI as an example, to really think about AI as a means to the end and not the end. Our customers won't use Bluevine because we use AI. Our customers will use Bluevine because we happen to solve a business need that they really want. And that business need could be insight into income and expenses, where we could give them really accurate insight 3, 6, 12 months down the road. But it's not because of AI that they care about. It's because of the insight that we give them. And so for me, it's really keeping the eye on the prize, which is how do we solve it for our customers?
I'm always like to ask the question about like the contrarian approaches, or even you could say controversial decision making. And I'm wondering, do you recall any of those like in your career? It doesn't have to be from the Bluevine, but maybe like some controversial or contrarian decision that you have made on a product level or in the engineering level too, and you were a part of it, and it worked out well. But from the outside, it's not so obvious that, like for everybody, but you felt that this is the right way to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I comes to two that come to mind. The first one was when I was at Xero, I ran the people portfolio, and part of that was the different payroll products. So UK payroll, Australian payroll, New Zealand payroll, and US payroll. We were just understaffed on the US payroll side of the house. And when you look at payroll, it's super complicated around regulations, around requirements. Regulations change. They get updated on an annual basis. You have to be able to go react. There's also compliance that's related to it. We were just understaffed. So I made the hard decision to actually sunset the product and move on to partner with another leading payroll provider in the US at that time. And so it was a really hard decision. I mean, humans were impacted here as part of it, namely the team. There was a board conversation that needed to be had. So it was a real difficult conversation, but ultimately the right one for stakeholders as well as for shareholders as well. So proud of that decision. Wasn't easy, but did that. I think an interesting challenge, here at Bluevine was really pivoting us. I talked about this earlier, Matt, where we were a one product company in a lending product. We've now pivoted to a multi-product suite where we have a hub and spoke model with a small business checking account at its core and center. And moving from a one product company to a multi-product company is a challenge. It's a mindset change. It's a resourcing allocation. It's not like we're Microsoft and we can go just hire more engineers through the whole process and more product managers. It's prioritizing, thinking about things differently, getting back to first principles, like we talked about earlier with Elon Musk and how he approaches things. So those are the two that come to mind.
This is really interesting what you mentioned. Like you have, and we already discussed it, that you have plenty of small products, right? But how do you structureize the teams around it? Do you have like a small teams with like somebody responsible for the one product, or how do you approach it?
Yeah, on the product side, I do. So I have, roughly speaking, I have it broken down into 4 teams. I got one team that's focused on small business banking. I got one team that is focused on our credit products. I got one team that is focused on platforms. So the interconnectivity between the whole systems and all the common objects. I got a platform team. And then I have a design team. So the design team is centralized, but the designers are dotted line into the specific teams as they're specialized and working on those said products.
And do you set some like OKRs or some kind of KPIs around those smaller products, let's say, to measure if they are successful, if the user are using it? If yes, I assume yes. Like, what do you measure? What is important to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. So the short answer is yes. We measure a number of different things. It basically has to ladder up to the company OKRs. So if the company OKRs have something around ARPU, then and contribution, then my OKRs down below for each team has something specifically around acquisition costs, have something related to fraud, for example, have something related to the onboarding funnel and the conversion. So it's the product experience that we build. It's the tools that we enable for risk to be able to do their work to minimize fraud that helps with contribution there and so forth. So the way that I think about it is having very explicit and clear OKRs for my team that ladder back up into the master OKRs or the company OKRs, if you will.
Um, and last but not least, the question that I asking all of my guests, it's about the recommendations. So, can you recommend any like books, resources, conferences that have been particularly helpful to you as a leader, as a CPO, that you had this maybe aha moment after reading one of those?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think the first one that comes to mind is an oldie but a goodie. I love it. It's A Hard Thing About Hard Things from Ben
Mm.
Horowitz, right? So that one stuck in my mind. There are multiple different things that I remember, one of which basically, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't want to swear on your podcast, but one of the things he said was, if you eat crap, don't nibble, right? And so I think that one is a very physical and it's one that resonates with me, and I'm reminded every time we're in a hard situation, just pull the Band-Aid off and deal with it, right? So I think that's one. The other one that I recently started reading or I just finished, was May Contain Lies, which is a pretty good book. It's really talking about how you can use data to manipulate your view. And so it's just a good reminder. We all know this, just to remember to question the assumptions on the data and not fall in the trap of overly believing what you're seeing. And then, of course, the other Walter Isaacson books are always fun to read, whether it be Elon Musk or whether it be Steve Jobs, or Albert Einstein. They're always fun reads for me, just to de-stress, if you will, and get his perspective on those individuals.
I think the second one is really important thing that not everybody is aware about, like the data. You can always choose the right data and where right charts to kind of support yourself with the decision. And I think that those top consulting companies are really good at doing it. So depends on kind of hypothesis they are having. They are always finding the right data to support.
Exactly. And so when you read those said reports, always question and make sure that the data that they're getting isn't skewed in one way, shape, or another.
Herman, thank you so much for all the insights and really cool restaurants. I really appreciate it. Thank you for today's talk.
You bet. Thanks a lot, man. It was fun.
Follow Matt on LinkedIn